Alright, welcome to this talk where we're going to talk about Cypress, or the end of laborious end-to-end testing. Before I get started, my name is Alan, or just Al, and I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies, more specifically Angular and Google Maps, and I've been writing code for a very long time. I started my career as a Java developer back in 2006, and I got into front-end development in 2011, and I've been working as a consultant and a trainer since then, and my company is angulartraining.com, and I'm based in Sacramento, California, where I'm recording this talk. So let's get started. What is Cypress? So Cypress is a complete end-to-end testing experience for anything that runs in a browser. Meaning that when you use Cypress, you're writing your tests with Cypress, you're running them with Cypress, you are debugging them with Cypress, and even the test failures are recorded by Cypress. And you get a video, a recording of a test run, as well as screenshots when there is an error or something going wrong. So in order to make things interesting, we are going to take a look at many different examples, and all of these examples are going to be based on a web app, store.angulartraining.com. It's a basic e-commerce store where it's a fake one, of course, where you can add license plates to a cart, you can go to a cart page, and then go to a checkout page, and basically interact with that application. And we're going to test it with Cypress. So let's start with the first basic test. Whenever we work with Cypress, from a syntax standpoint, it's based on Mocha and Chai, which are two popular JavaScript libraries for testing. This means that every single test is going to have the following syntax, where first we have a describe function. That is really a bunch of tests that we group together. So maybe you want to test a specific page or a specific feature, and you want to group all of the tests related to that page or feature in that one describe function. This function takes a first parameter string to describe what we are testing here, and the second parameter is a function where we have the actual testing. So then within that function, we have the individual tests, and they are it functions, like this one. Same pattern, the first parameter is a string to describe what we are testing. Second parameter is a function where we do a test. And in that simple scenario, what we do is cy.visit store.angulartraining.com, which is basically going to open that page in the browser. So let's take a look at that example and run that first test. So I'm going to my IDE, and in here I'm going to do npx Cypress open. And so when we run that command, it's loading Cypress, which is opening another browser window. It's asking us if we want to do end-to-end testing or component testing. In this talk, I'm only going to cover end-to-end testing, but be aware that you can also use Cypress to test components with React, Angular, and Vue, I believe. All of those can be tested individually with Cypress. We're just going to focus on the end-to-end experience for now. So I'm clicking on it. I can choose the browser that Cypress is going to use for those tests. I'm going to go with Chrome. So you see that you could use Chrome, Edge, Electron, or Firefox. These are all the ones installed on my machine. Starting in Chrome. And as soon as I do this, it's going to ask me to run a test. So I'm going to pick that first one and run it. And test is loading, and test is passing. So here we can see that the test ran, and it was successful, so everything is green. And you see the strings here, license plate store homepage, displays the right main title. These things come from the strings in our describe function and in our it function. So this one didn't test much, right? Because all we did here was visit the page, and we're not actually checking anything. So how would we test things with Cypress? The first way to do this is to use a function called contains. And contains is going to select an element by its text contents. So I'm looking for a title, a button, a menu item, anything you want on the screen. It's going to try to select that, and if it is on the screen, then it's going to select it. If it isn't here, then Cypress is going to wait and retry and retry and retry for up to 4 seconds by default. So that's one of the nice features of Cypress. You don't have to tell Cypress to wait for things to happen. It's going to wait automatically, and after the timeout, so here 4 seconds, if the element is not present after 4 seconds, then the test would fail. Of course, you can change that timeout if you think that 4 seconds is too short for your scenario. You can make it, longer, shorter, up to you. You can readjust all of these values, but the default is 4 seconds. So this makes our test pretty easy from a syntax standpoint, because then all we have to do is cy.contains welcome to our store. And if that text is present on the screen, then the test passes. If not, the test fails. Of course, on top of that, we can add assertions. We can make things more specific and check that, for instance, our welcome to our store is not only on the screen, but it's also visible. And by visible, we mean that it's visible to the user, meaning the user doesn't have to scroll down to see that element. The element is not hidden by an overlay or anything. It is truly in the viewport of the user, and they can see that, title in that case on the screen. And we can check other things. So it should have some CSS, font weight 300. So you can really check that it has the right color, right fonts, right, tags, anything you want. There's many different assertions available, and you can chain them using should, just like this. So should be visible, should have some specific CSS, should be enabled, disabled. Pretty much anything you can think of, it is available and accessible through that API. So let's give it a try. Let's go here and here. So see the first test here. We are going to visit the landing page of our store. And once we get to that landing page, we're going to check that welcome to our store is here. It should be visible. It should have some specific font weight and font size and have a font family that matches the following regular expression. That's the idea. So, okay, let's take a look. I'm going to open my Cypress window here. And in my Cypress window, I'm going to go back to the specs, select the second one. It's super fast. You can see that the test already ran and both of them passed and everything's working. So far so good. We're using Cypress, testing things, and it found the right item. So when you go over a command in this UI, it is highlighting the element that it found. So this is the welcome to our store that was found, and that matches all of the expectations that we set in terms of CSS, visibility, and everything. So now there are other commands. We just talked about contains as a way to check that something is on the screen by text. If we want to be more precise, there's a get. So cy.get is going to select an element by CSS selector. And a CSS selector can be as precise as you need it to be. So you can select a H1, you can select by class, you can select by ID, anything you want. It's really, you can make the query as precise as needed. And the interesting thing about the Cypress user interface is that it actually has a selector playground here. So this little piece of UI here, if I click on it, now I can select an element on the screen, and you can see that it is suggesting a CSS selector for me to get that element and select it. It even tells us that if I use that specific query, it's returning only one match. So you don't even have to figure out complex selector for anything. You can use that idea to select, a button or an image and make sure that the selection is unique, and then copy and paste that in your code. There's even a shortcut to copy automatically in your clipboard. So that's really nice. And so with this in mind, we can try to test something else. And our second test is going to be, we want to make sure that we are displaying 8 different license plates. Not just one, but 8 of them. So let's take a look at a possible test for this. This is test number 2 right here. We navigate to our store, and then we check that we have 8 app license plate components on the screen. So this app is built with Angular, and when we use Angular, we have components. Those components have an HTML tag name. So I'm using that trick, basically, since I have a unique tag name for all of my license plates. I can use that as a selector. And then I'm checking that I have 8 of them on the screen. So that's a test I ran earlier. This was my test number 2 here, and it passes as well. It found 8 license plate components. You see all of them being highlighted on the screen here, and so that test passes as well. So 2 tests, everything is green. So far, so good. And we test quite a few things already, right? We really test that, things are being displayed and that these license plates come from a request to the backend. So by checking that we have 8 of them, we're really making sure that the data got loaded properly and then is displayed accordingly. But of course, we probably want to test more with these license plates. So let's get back to learning more about Cypress. The first thing we can do is that there's going to be tasks that run before every single test, right? There's things that we want to set up before every single test, such as going to the page that we're testing. So instead of repeating that command over and over again, visit store.angulartraining.com, I can do it once for all and wrap it in a before each function. That's going to run before every single test. So that way we know that before every test, the first thing we do is go to that page and then run the other tests. So that's a nice thing we can do. And we can actually make this even better and even simpler by defining a base URL in the Cypress config. So if you set that base URL to store.angulartraining.com, then you can just say cypress.visit/, which would basically be relative to that base URL. And that Cypress JSON config file is where you can change everything Cypress related. So if you want a longer or a shorter command timeout, you can change it here as well. And you can decide to really override any of these config options. These options are visible in the UI as well. If I go to project settings, it is showing me my Cypress config.json, and if I open it, I don't want to open it. I can open it in my IDE, but yeah, it's just going to show the config that I have overridden, in my case the base URL, and it shows the default values for everything else, which is really nice. So you can get an idea of what are all of the config options, which one you can change, and of course, the documentation helps with that as well. Okay, so let's give this a try. Going back to our code and the third example. So now in my tests, I removed the cy.visit and I moved it to before each. And because we set the base URL, I can just say cy.visit/, which is a lot better, a lot more cleaner, reusable and everything. So if the URL changes later on, I only have to change it in my Cypress config.json and not in every single test. And then the tests do exactly the same thing as before. So let's just make sure they are still working. Going to my spec, selecting the third one, and everything is still green. So pretty good. So of course, what we did so far was just check that things are displayed on the screen. But with Cypress, you can interact with a web page and really simulate a user playing with it. So you can type, you can click, and you can simulate any sort of event. For instance, if you want to simulate a user typing the enter key, you can use the following command, type enter, and that would simulate, typing enter. You can test shortcut like Control-K, Control-Z, Control-C, all of these are possible. So you can really go pretty much, in depth and validate all sorts of things with these commands. So we can use that feature to check that we can navigate between our different screens. So that's my other test here. So I want to check that I can navigate to the cart page, which means I'm going to find the link to my cart and click on it. And then I'm going to check that my cart should be visible. And I'm going to check that your current cart contents should be visible on the page as well. So the nice thing about it is that we only know about 3 different commands at this point: visit, contains, and get. And just with that, we can already test lots of different things. So here, this is going to go to a cart page, and same thing with the checkout page. Contains checkout, click on it, and then enter your personal information to complete your order. So let's run that test pretty quickly. And Cypress is always quick anyways. Let's do it. And yeah, you can see that it navigated to all of these pages, and now we are on the checkout page, which is a great opportunity for me to illustrate a feature that Cypress has, which is called time traveling. Because you run these tests, they go very, very fast, and we don't see what happens in every single one of them. So the good thing about this UI is I can click on any of the tests and then go over these commands, and you can see exactly what happened at that point in time in the test. So I can navigate back to the previous tests and see the transitions in the DOM before, after each command, see how the user interface changed and what was selected by my commands. So this is very powerful for debugging purposes. I don't have to run the test again or try to slow it down or anything. I can just go over these commands and really visualize what was selected, what happened, and what was the state of the user interface at that exact point in time, which is very, very powerful. Of course, if things fail, so let's say I made a typo in here. I made a typo in my tests, I save it. Cypress is actually going to run automatically when we make a change. The test is running. This is our 4-second timeout, and then we get the error. And when you get that error, it's actually pinpointed to the command that failed. So here it's saying that it didn't find that text after 4,000 milliseconds. So even the need to, go back in the past and review those past tests is rarely needed, because when something goes wrong, you can see that Cypress is very specific about that error. Alright, so let's fix my test, get back to the previous code. It's going to run instantly, everything's green, perfect. Moving on. One of my favorite features of Cypress is that we can also create custom commands, meaning that there are things we repeat all the time. If you have a web app, logging in, for instance, is something you might need for most of your tests. So you can create your own custom command. Here it's called login, and that custom command repeats all of the steps needed in order to log in. So the login command takes two params, email and password. And how do we log in? Well, we visit the login page, we type the email in the login element, we type the password in the password element, we find the submit button, and we click on it. So these 4 commands, I don't have to use them anymore. All what I can do now is cy.login and using username and password. So the name of the command is login because when we registered it, we use that login string here. And so with that in mind, we can now create our own commands and use it to check all of our license plates. So here I can do something like this, check license plate at index 1 and make sure that it's a Georgia license plate and the price is $8, and I can check all of my individual plates like this, one by one, which is easier to read, easier to understand. And the command that does that magic is the following. So I registered my command, check license plate at, using the index, taking an array of any number of strings to check. And what I do is use a for loop to say select the nth of type license plate. So using the index, I either select the first one or the second one or the 8th one, and then making sure it contains our string and should be visible. So that one command can test a lot of things, and we can use it over and over again, and it makes our tests a lot more readable. So commands are a great feature, really a way to refactor your code, make it more maintainable, make it easier to write tests. So even if you have a team where not everyone is a developer, other people could contribute and start using those commands easily without having to understand how Cypress works. So you can really even involve QA people who are not JavaScript developers into writing more scenarios once you have the right commands that make it nice and easy. The other important thing about testing is that sometimes there are features that are difficult to test because the database doesn't have the right data. It doesn't have exactly what we need in terms of test scenarios. So in most cases, what we would like to do is simulate what happens if the backend server gives us that data, right? And so that's what we are doing here. That's what this is, intercepting a request to /rates and returning a mocked response as a result. So you can override really and intercept an HTTP request and make it return a custom data, either for a single test or for a whole bunch of unit tests. So I'll show you that as an example here. So here cy.intercept /rates, and I'm just going to return custom exchange rates. Same thing with /data. It's going to use a fixture, which is a file. So there's a fixture folder in our project. That folder has a file called place.json. So it's just going to read that JSON and return it. I can show it to you. This is a JSON with all of the license plates. And I could have many of them, so I can check, different prices, different features and everything. And once we have intercepted those requests, we can write our tests accordingly. So in the one thing that would be difficult to test if we didn't have those mocks would be this scenario here, because the app has a component to switch the currency. And of course, when you change the currency, the prices are updated and use the new currency to display the prices. So here I'm clicking on the currency switcher. I'm clicking on Euro instead of USD. And then I'm checking that all of my prices are now in euros with the exchange rate applied. And the exchange rate I set in my mock is 1.5. So because the backend, my fake backend now is returning that 1.5 exchange rate, all of those prices should be displaying euro 12 instead of 8, 16.5 instead of 11, and so forth. So let's run that test, make sure that it is working. I click here, and all of my tests are running and they all pass. And you can see that my prices are in euros right now. And again, if I wanted to debug and go step by step, I can use the time travel feature here. So I can see that where it clicked right in the middle of my currency switcher component. And see, it's blinking, it's showing before, after, before, after. So before the click, after the click. So I can really see that the click on the component opened the drop down. And then clicking on Euro. And after that, the drop down closes automatically and the prices change. See, we can visualize all of this. We click on the drop down, the prices down here get updated, which is perfect. And then we see the commands checking everything one by one, the titles and the descriptions, the titles and the description. And all of that, again, so testing all of these features, right? Changing the prices, checking that it's applied all over the place, is done in 10 lines of code, which is really, really hard to beat, right? It's hard to write less code than this. So yeah, you can test lots of features. The tests are very expressive, very easy to read, and even a non-developer can easily get into it. So sometimes if you want to wait for a specific request to complete, you can do that as well. There's a command to wait for a specific request to complete. It's very, very rare that you will need it because, again, Cypress has this timeout built in that's going to wait for us. So usually we don't even need that at all. But just so you know, it's also part of the API. So this was a very short introduction to Cypress. And in just 30 minutes, we covered a lot of ground, right? You were able to see that we can really do a lot. Very simple commands. Everything is integrated. One user interface. We can debug, we can time travel, we can take a look at the result. We didn't see the screenshots or the videos, but if we ran those commands without a UI in the continuous integration mode, which is just a different command in Cypress, then it would output those screenshots when a test fails and a video recording of every single test as well. So I really recommend to, take a look. Try it out. It's very easy to get started. A very good technology. And here's a link to my slides, a link to my blog. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the conference and thanks for watching this talk.